either Niall Capello or Neely Capello or Nile, I'm not sure. Okay. Part 1. For most residents of Holland, Michigan, there was nothing remarkable about March 11th, 1989, a Saturday. Frost on the ladders of the city's water towers thawed in the sun. Spring was just over a week away. What is wrong with me? Spring was just over a week away. Mothers poured milk over cereal for kids watching back-to-back episodes of their favorite cartoons. Fathers who worked weekends drove pickup trucks to industrial jobs at local automotive and concrete companies. But all was not well in the house on the corner of Lincoln Road and 52nd Street. It belonged to Dennis and Brenda Bowman, a married couple with 2 children. For the Bowmans, March 11th marked the last time they saw their 14-year-old daughter, Andrea, alive. Dennis was the one who contacted the police. He told them that he'd come home from his job as a wood machinist to find Andrea missing, along with some of her belongings and $100 from his dresser. I just want to point out, by the way, I'm not mispronouncing Andrea. It's spelled Aundria, and I hope that I'm pronouncing her name right because obviously she deserves that respect. Dennis described Andrea, whom he and Brenda had adopted when she was an infant, as a troubled teenager who frequently fought with her mother and had run away to a friend's house once before. Dennis agreed to call around to the homes of the kids Andrea knew to find out if anyone had seen her, but his wife soon took over as the family's point of contact. It was Brenda who called the police regularly, and Brenda who corrected the amount of cash missing from her husband's dresser to $150. That was enough for police to issue a warrant for Andrea's arrest for larceny. The warrant listed Dennis as the victim of his daughter's alleged crimes. With no foul play suspected, the police labeled Andrea a runaway and passed her case along to the Youth Services Bureau. Few people who knew the Bowmans questioned the official narrative. Over the years, there had been whispers about the family. Once, when Andrea was in middle school, she boarded the school bus bleeding from her wrists. Some kids gossiped about a suicide attempt, but others said Andrea had cut herself, trying to get back into her house after her parents locked her out. There were rumors that Dennis, a former Navy reservist with reddish brown hair and a goatee, and wire-rimmed glasses, and Brenda, a portly woman with curled bangs, who had once worked at the jewelry counter at the Meyer discount store, abused Andrea. But back then, what happened behind closed doors was considered family business. 15 months before Andrea disappeared, Brenda gave birth to a daughter, Vanessa. Andrea went from being an only child to more than a big sister. She was a third parent to the chubby, red-headed baby. While other kids her age went to after-school clubs and Friday night football games, Andrea stayed home, changing diapers and cleaning bottles. She kept a photo of her sister in a school folder where other teens might stash a magazine cutout or a Polaroid of their crush. When she wasn't with Vanessa, Andrea was anxious about the baby's well-being. Don't like that. Many people in Holland one of them. Carl Koperman never expected to solve mysteries. He worked as an accountant until 2009, when his mother's health began to decline. At 46, Koppelman became a full-time caregiver, and his days, once filled with reviews of spreadsheets and financial statements, now revolved around driving to doctor's appointments and administering medications. When he wasn't tending to his mother, Koppelman was online, exploring message boards, news sites, and social media. At the time, the story dominating headlines and bordering on popular obsession was the return of J.C. Dugard. In 1991, Dugard had been kidnapped while walking to a bus stop near her home south of Lake Tahoe, California. The blonde, freckled 11-year-old was the subject of a nationwide search. But eventually the case went cold. Then, on August 26, 2009, Dugard reappeared for 18 years. Convicted sex offender Philip Garrido and his wife Nancy had held her captive at their home in the town of Antioch, more than 150 miles from where they'd kidnapped her. Dugard had given birth to two of Garrido's daughters, who were now 11 and 15. To the embarrassment of local authorities, parole officers had visited the Garrido's home several times during the years Dugard was missing. They'd failed to check the backyard where the young woman was kept in a network of tents, lean-tos, and sheds. Koppelman's interest in the Dugard case led him to Web Sleuths, a forum where crime hobbyists and armchair detectives connect and collaborate on unsolved cases. Koppelman gravitated to posts about cold cases, the ones least likely to ever be solved. Until recently, Dugard had been one of them. How many more would benefit from fresh eyes and a little perspective? Persistence. Not perspective. Koppelman spent countless hours scrolling through the nation's database of missing persons and unidentified bodies, known as NAMUS. There's overlap between the two main parts of the database, the disappeared and the deceased. The trick is finding it during late nights at his computer in a dimly lit corner of his mother's suburban home in El Segundo, California. Koppelman would try to match the characteristics of people who had gone missing with those of the unidentified dead. Finding a likeness could be enough to generate a tip for law enforcement. When Koppelman noticed the age and condition of some bodies might make it difficult for loved ones to recognize them, it sparked an idea. Koppelman liked to draw portraits for fun, and he was pretty good at it. He also had a CD-ROM of the image editing software CorelDRAW, which someone had given him as a gift. One day, with his mother napping in the next room, Koppelman installed the program on his computer. It was his first step towards becoming a forensic sketch artist. He started creating lifelike renderings of Jane and John Doe's based on photos taken post-mortem. He used CorelDRAW to open eyes, fill in sunken cheeks, and give faces more dynamic expressions. In complicated cases where bodies had been decomposed, he recreated facial structure. The goal was to make the dead more recognizable to loved ones searching for them and to police trying to identify them. Once he finished a rendering, Koppelman sent it to NAMUS, and the database would sometimes publish it. He also posted his work on Web Sleuths so other armchair detectives could use it in their identification efforts. Eventually, Koppelman began working with police departments and the DNA Doe Project, which identifies human remains through genetic testing and genealogical research. Glad to help law enforcement generate leads and in some instances put a name to a face, Koppelman was almost always an unpaid volunteer. His renderings were instrumental in solving several cold cases, including the identification of the Cali Jane Doe, Tammy Jo Alexander, in 2015. But before all that, in 2009, when he was just starting out as an amateur sleuth, Koppelman got interested in the case of Racine County Jane Doe. When she was found near the edge of Wisconsin cornfield in 1999, the woman had only been dead for about 12 hours, but rain had washed away any evidence that might have been useful to investigators. and short, reddish-brown hair. She was 5'8" and 120 pounds and estimated between 18 to 30 years old. She was found wearing a men's gray and silver Western-style shirt embroidered with red flowers, a design the manufacturer told police from the mid-1980s. On NAMAS, Koppelman plugged in some general search criteria, gender, age, location, and clicked through the results for missing persons. With each one, Koppelman asked himself, could this be her? In most cases, the answer was a clear no. The age didn't match or the location made no sense. But one entry gave Koppelman pause. Andrea Bowman. Andrea and the Racine County Jane Doe shared physical characteristics and their ages aligned. Andrea would have been 25 in 1999 when the Jane Doe was killed. Holland, where Andrea disappeared, sits directly across Lake Michigan from where the Jane Doe was found. It's just 4 hours by car from one location to the other, tracing the lake's southern shoreline and passing through Chicago. To test the possible identification, Koppelman created a composite image superimposing Andrea's photo with ones from the Jane Doe autopsy. He marked the similarities in red. Koppelman took his theory to the law enforcement, who found it compelling enough to investigate. To determine whether the Jane Doe was Andrea, police would need to compare DNA from the body with that of someone in Andrea's family. Because Andrea was adopted, authorities had to track down her birth mother. Koppelman knew that could take a while, or that it might never happen, forcing investigators to find other avenues for identification. As the police did their part, Koppelman kept poking around online, learning what he could about Andrea. One day, at the end of 2012, he came across a classmates.com page for Andrea, the premium kind you have to pay to keep active in order to connect directly with former school acquaintances. Was this Andrea alive and well and trying to find old friends? And if it wasn't her, who was it? Kathy Turkanian's life story seems ripped from the plot of a made-for-TV movie. Her mother, Shirley, had 6 children with 3 men. Turkanian's stepfather was in the Navy, and the family moved 7 times before she started the 7th grade. The stepfather was deployed for long stretches, and Turkanian's mother was overwhelmed by the demands of taking care of so many kids, including one who had epilepsy. With no one looking after her, Turkanian was molested at the age of 10 by the husband of one of her mother's friends. Then, Ard, at 12 by a teenager. She knew she had to escape her existence, so she started to make a plan. In 1972, Turkanian left Virginia, where her family was living at the time, with no clothes except what she was wearing and without saying goodbye. She was 14 and had no money. She hitchhiked to Tennessee, where she met up with a friend in Memphis, and then went to the city's Greyhound bus station. She didn't have a destination in mind, but noticed another traveler wearing colorful beads, who mentioned a party down in New Orleans called Mardi Gras. The next day, Turkanian arrived in the Big Easy, where jazz music reverberated through the French Quarter and people laughed and sang jubilantly in the streets. In the midst of the counterculture movement of the 1970s, Turkanian wasn't the only runaway teen in New Orleans. She met a network of young people who helped each other, offering a place to crash, a job, and tips and tricks for staying off the street. Through this group, she met Randy Patcher, a 19-year-old who'd recently hitchhiked to Louisiana from Los Angeles. Before long, they found a place to stay and were doing everything together. They even got joint work at a circus sideshow. For the first time, Turkanian was living her life how she wanted to. In December 1972, Turkanian and Patcher traveled to South Carolina, where it was legal for a minor to get married if they had parental permission. Turkanian's parents gave it gladly. In fact, they insisted on the union. Shirley didn't want to be the person a shift to find Patrick kissing another woman on the couch, while Alexis was alone in the back room crying, without a diaper on. Turkanian decided to leave, but she had to think about Alexis too. What would be best for her daughter? Turkanian resigned herself to what she considered her only option. She went home to Virginia. During the 5-day Greyhound ride, Alexis barely cried. Passengers complimented Turkanian, welcome encouragement for the now single teen mom, but whatever confidence Turkanian felt vanished when she arrived in Norfolk and her mother picked her up at the station. Shirley didn't throw her arms around her daughter or blank kisses on Alexis's plump cheeks. Instead, she looked the pair up and down and puckered her face in judgment. It turned out that Shirley had been diagnosed with breast cancer and given just 5 years to live. Turkanian quickly realized that her mother expected her to care for her siblings, and while Shirley never said it outright, it was clear she didn't think Turkanian could have a child of her own. One day, casually, Shirley said, "You ran out of formula. How are you going to take care of this kid?" A seed was planted, and from it, Turkanian's doubt grew. She increasingly felt like she couldn't give Alexis the life her daughter deserved. Turkanian agreed to give her baby up for adoption. Shirley handled the logistics, assuring Turkanian that Alexis would be taken in by a good family through Catholic charities. Shortly after the adoption was finalized, Turkanian left home again. This time, the teenager hoped that things would be different. Turkanian eventually went to nursing school and met her current husband. They never started a family of their own. More than 30 years, she didn't have any idea what had become of her daughter. Turkanian, with blonde hair and a confident smile, sometimes wondered if Alexis looked like her. She hoped her daughter was happy and that Alexis's adoptive parents knew how lucky they were. Then, in April 2010, a letter arrived at Turkanian's home in Massachusetts that upended her life. It was from a social worker who explained that Alexis had disappeared from her adopted home in Michigan in 1989. Police were investigating a new lead in the case, that Alexis might be a Jane Doe found in Wisconsin, a dead girl. Police needed a sample of Turkanian's DNA to know for sure. Turkanian was perplexed by how little information the letter provided. It didn't include Alexis's adoptive name or the city where she lived, nor did it offer contact information for police or any details about Alexis's disappearance when she was 14, the same age Turkanian had been when she ran away from home. Turkanian was willing to share her DNA, but she wanted to know more about what had happened to her daughter. She searched online for information about missing girls in Michigan. It didn't take long to find one from the town of Holland, whose birthday and physical description matched Alexis's. When she saw the girl's school photo, Turkanian thought Andrea Bowman could be her daughter. Eventually, Turkanian would learn that as a baby, Alexis had wound up in the hands of Virginia Department of Social Services. Someone, possibly Shirley, had reported that Alexis was born with fetal alcohol syndrome and that Turkanian had taken LSD during the pregnancy. Both lies, Turkanian insisted. The life she'd imagined Alexis would have crumbled in her mind. Desperate to know the truth, Turkanian set up a Facebook page about Andrea's disappearance, as well as a classmates.com account in Andrea's name. She was hoping to connect with her daughter's old friends. Instead, she found Carl Koppelman. Turkanian and Koppelman began exchanging messages, which led to a series of long phone conversations. Turkanian also met other online sleuths interested in Andrea's case, including a woman in New Jersey named Sue Kovacs, who helped Turkanian revamp the Find Andrea Facebook page and expand its search. Everyone waited for the results of Turkanian's DNA test. Turkanian. What have I been saying up until now? I can't remember. To see if there was a match from the Racine County Jane Doe. But for the people invested in the case, determining whether Andrea's body had been found was just one of the pieces of the puzzle. If Andrea was indeed dead, how had it happened? If she had been killed, who was responsible? Turkanian got in touch with a retired Michigan detective familiar with Andrea's case, a man named Pat O'Reilly. His frankness surprised her. They botched this case from the beginning. Turkanian remembered him saying, according to O'Reilly, the person Turkanian needed to be looking at was Andrea's adoptive father, Dennis Bowman. Part 2. Michigan. When a motorcyclist forced her off the road, the man told her to get off the bike and walk into the woods. The young woman didn't move. All she needed was a moment to think, to distract him to do something. The man pulled out a gun, fired a shot past her, and repeated the order. Still, she didn't budge. The man fired the gun again, this time at the ground near her feet. He said he would shoot her next. Just then, a car drove by, and the motorcyclist turned his head at the noise. The young woman took the opportunity to pedal away as fast as she could. The man didn't shoot or give chase, and she was able to flag down somebody in a pickup truck who drove her home. Her parents called the police, and the young woman provided a description of the suspect. A white male with tinted glasses and a blue helmet. His motorcycle, she said, had a black top case mounted on the back. By the end of the day, the police had detained a suspect. The young woman took one look at him and confirmed that he was the man who tried to attack her. It was Dennis Bowman, who by then was already a husband and a father. At the time, Andrea was almost 6 years old. Dennis was convicted of assault with intent to commit a criminal sexual conduct and sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. He was referred for psychological counseling, and a judge determined that he would likely pose a danger to women if he went free. Still, Dennis served the minimum sentence. Brenda stood by her husband, and then she did so again in 1998. One day that year, a state trooper in Dorr, Michigan, responded to an alarm at the mobile home of 28-year-old Vicki Vandenbrink. She'd reported so many break-ins that the sheriff's department had installed a security system. When the trooper arrived at the scene, he found Dennis Bowman walking away from the back door. The Bowmans had moved to Hamilton, a town nestled between Holland and Dorr, in 1989. Shortly after Andrea's disappearance, and Dennis told the officers he was temporarily staying with Vandenbrink, who was a former co-worker of his. He was let go, but when authorities got in touch with Vandenbrink, who wasn't home when the alarm went off, she said Dennis was lying. Dennis then changed his story, telling law enforcement that he'd entered the trailer to use the bathroom. He'd been there at least once before, he claimed, when his daughter Vanessa wanted to sell Girl Scout cookies to Vandenbrink. Skeptical, the police obtained Dennis's permission to search his property. In the loft of an outbuilding, they found a black duffel bag containing lingerie that was later identified as Vandenbrink's, as well as a short-barreled shotgun, a black sweatshirt, and a mask. Dennis pled guilty to one count of breaking and entering. His sentencing memo, written by his attorney, doesn't mention his 1980 conviction or the prior break-ins that Vandenbrink had reported, which police believed Dennis was responsible for. Dennis's lawyer presented letters written on his client's behalf by various people. The counselor who ran Dennis's sex offender group treatment program, the principal of Vanessa's elementary school, Dennis's boss, and a congregant at Christ Memorial Church who noted that Dennis had taught Sunday school to kindergartners for the past 6 years. The court also received a letter from Brenda, who defended her husband, and from Dennis himself, who wrote of his behavior. Sometimes we don't realize the problem until it confronts us face to face. Dennis described himself as happily married for 28 years, and he said that he had 2 daughters, one 25 and the other 11. He didn't mention that the older one had been missing for more than a decade. Kathy Turkanian learned the details of Dennis Bowman's criminal record after submitting a Freedom of Information Act request. Based on what Detective Pat O'Reilly had told her, it had seemed logical to dig into Bowman's past. Reading for the first time about what Bowman had done to 2 young women, Turkanian felt a terrible certainty. When I got his FOIA records, I said, "Oh, this man killed my daughter." If Turkanian was right, it would mean that the Racine County Jane Doe wasn't Andrea. That theory made sense only if Andrea were still alive 10 years after she disappeared. In 2013, the long-awaited DNA results confirmed it. Turkanian wasn't related to the Jane Doe. She and Koppelman, along with the other amateur sleuths interested in Andrea's story, had thought they were connecting the dots in a single cold case, where all along they'd been looking at 2. Koppelman and Turkanian were equally yet uniquely obsessed Bowman needed to be behind bars. With his criminal record in hand, she began writing Facebook posts accusing Bowman of being responsible for Andrea's disappearance. She also assembled a Rolodex of people who had known her daughter. Russ Foster, who briefly dated Andrea in high school, Linda Berens, the mother of a classmate, Ellie Ramos, who rode the school bus with Andrea, and a couple named the Schaefers, who had grown up with Dennis and Brenda in Muskegon, Michigan, and whose daughter, Mindy, remembered seeing Andrea in the runaway train video. Turkanian learned about Andrea's difficult home life and her anxiety about caring for her baby sister. In September 2013, Turkanian and Koppelman met in person at the Missing in Michigan conference. Organized by state police, the conference was designed to raise awareness about and hopefully generate leads in cold cases. Family members and friends of missing persons gathered one Sunday at the Eagle Eye Golf Club in East Lansing, their nervous whispers filling a banquet hall overlooking a green. The schedule included panels, support groups, and even DNA collections so police could look for matches between families and unidentified remains. Turkanian and Koppelman showed up in custom shirts that read, "Find Andrea Bowman." The day kicked off with an early morning group therapy session. Turkanian and Koppelman took their seats in a large circle and listened as people introduced themselves. Koppelman scanned the room and was surprised when his eyes landed on familiar faces. He nudged Turkanian and she looked over. "That's Vanessa," she said, "and that's Brenda." Brenda and Vanessa recognized Turkanian too. The Bowmans were aware of what Turkanian had been saying about Dennis on Facebook. When it was Brenda's turn to introduce herself, she told the room, "We have a little situation here." Looking at Turkanian, she added, "I can see that you very much resemble Andrea." Brenda tried to keep talking, but Turkanian didn't let her. She had lain awake so many nights, furious that her daughter's adoptive mother hadn't protected her. "Tell them the truth, Brenda," Turkanian blurted out. "Tell them about your husband." The session descended into a dramatic exchange before finally getting back on track. Afterward, Turkanian hung back as Koppelman approached Brenda, insisting that he only wanted to talk. Though flustered, Brenda seemed eager to explain her side of the story. She insisted that she and Dennis had fully cooperated with police after Andrea's disappearance. She presented a binder full of notes and missing person flyers as proof. She recounted sightings of Andrea. It was clear she still believed that the teenager had run away. According to Koppelman, when he brought up Dennis's criminal record, Brenda replied, "I haven't forgotten what he did, but I do forgive him. I take my marriage vows very seriously." Koppelman thought her words sounded rehearsed, but not disingenuous. Turkanian had been biting her tongue while Brenda and Koppelman spoke, but now she exploded. "Tell us how you abused, starved, and humiliated her, Brenda," she yelled. Vanessa reacting to the verbal attack on her mother had to be held back by a male attendee. "You need to be put in a effing insane asylum." Koppelman remembered Vanessa saying to Turkanian, "The Bowmans and Turkanians avoided each other for the rest of the day." Brenda and Vanessa Bowman didn't respond to interview requests. Oh, that's in parentheses. Okay. After the conference, Koppelman and Turkanian returned to their respective homes on the east and west coasts, but they'd already decided they needed someone on the ground in Michigan, a private investigator to keep working Andrea's case closer to where she'd gone missing. but she said she didn't want to go. According to Jones, Andrea said that her father was sexually abusing her. Jones's mother let her stay the night, and the next day took her to the principal's office where Andrea repeated the accusations to the school officials. Jones was sent to class and assured that the adults would handle the situation. Andrea wasn't at school the rest of the day, and Jones assumed that she was in protective custody. Later, she learned that Andrea had gone home with her parents. Around the time Andrea confided in Jones and her mother, she also spoke to Arlene Ron, another local mom. Andrea befriended Ron's son through their church's youth group and had started hanging out at their house. Ron assumed Andrea had a crush on one of the boys. Eventually, Andrea told Ron that her father was abusing her. She also said that Brenda knew and didn't care. Ron was hesitant to get involved. She told Andrea to talk to her youth pastor. Then, one evening, as Ron pulled into the Bowman's driveway to drop Andrea off, Dennis appeared and told Ron to stay out of his business. It just made me so uncomfortable, she later said. Ron never reported the incident to authorities. Within a few months, Andrea was gone. There were other red flags. The Schaefers, the couple who had grown up with the Bowmans in Muskegon, knew about Dennis's criminal record and recalled him bragging about sexual conquest as early as high school. They'd always felt uneasy about him, and they kept a watchful eye over their own daughter when he was around. The Schaefers ultimately ended their friendship with the Bowmans after Andrea went missing. When their daughter, Mindy, found the Facebook page for Andrea, she said her parents had never been contacted by the police about the case. In fact, it wasn't until Koppelman and Turkanian connected with them on Facebook that the couple spoke to anyone about their suspicions. Facebook turned up another source, one who believed that Dennis Bowman's criminal record had persisted between his convictions of 1980 and 1998. When Melissa found the Find Andrea page, she sent a message to the administrators describing what had happened to her on a bright September afternoon in 1989 when she was 6. She was walking to a friend's house. She was flagged down by a man in a truck who promised to take her to see some puppies. He told her that her mother said it was okay and pulled Melissa into the cab. As he drove, the man stroked her face. Melissa's stomach churned. "Is that it?" she asked again and again, pointing to each barn, and turned off they passed, hoping that was where the puppies would be. Eventually, the driver pulled into a rural area near the town of Hamilton. The man parked the truck, grabbed Melissa by the neck, and dragged her into a thicket. Okay, I can't read the rest of this. Basically, he attacked her, and, but a dog started barking, so he got scared off and he ran. And she was left alone. She was, naked and barefoot on the main road. 2 cars pulled over and someone called 911. The police visited Melissa's home that night, and a sketch artist created a rendering of the perpetrator in his vehicle, a red pickup truck with a white cab, but a suspect was never found. The case went cold, and the statute of limitations eventually expired. As she got older, what bothered Melissa most was that the man who attacked her was still out there and could be hurting other girls. She kept tabs on local news articles, police statements, and social media posts, looking for any stories like hers, but it wasn't until she stumbled upon the Find Andrea Facebook page that Melissa believed she could finally name the man who lured her into the truck: Dennis Bowman. Turkanian and Koppelman were now convinced that Dennis Bowman was a serial predator who had killed Andrea and covered it up by claiming that she'd run away. By 2016, Turkanian said, "I was screaming from the tops of Facebook that he had my daughter buried in his backyard, but any evidence remained circumstantial at best. There was no proof Andrea was dead, let alone murdered, and nothing tied Bowman to other unsolved criminal cases, including Melissa's abduction." Between 2013 and 2017, Turkanian and Koppelman met in Michigan 4 times. While there, they occasionally caught up with Chris Haberdink, the detective who'd taken over Andrea's case. Usually, they met him on the patio of Goog's Pub and Grub, a local haunt next to the Days Inn where Melissa worked, and helped Turkanian and Koppelman get discounted street maps and satellite images, Turkanian had zeroed in on a concrete slab at the back of the property. She was convinced Bowman had buried her daughter underneath it. She stared at the house until the last possible minute, when Koppelman insisted they'd miss their flights if they didn't leave. She was just sitting there with these binoculars, Koppelman said, like she knew that's where Andrea was. Part 3. Peggy Johnson was never reported missing. She was last seen at a homecoming dance in Harvard, Illinois in 1994, and most people who knew her assumed she'd run away. Her aunt worried enough to take out a classified ad in the paper, but nobody seems to suspect that something terrible might have happened to the auburn-haired girl. Johnson disappeared shortly after the death of her mother, the sole parent in her low-income household. The 19-year-old found herself orphaned and homeless with a developmental disability that made it difficult for her to get a job. By chance, she met a nurse named Linda LaRoche, who offered her work as a live-in housekeeper and nanny to her children. The teenager jumped at the opportunity. Over the next 5 years, LaRoche abused Johnson, beating her, starving her, and forcing her to live in a crawl space. The violence culminated in 1999 when LaRoche allegedly murdered the 23-year-old. When Johnson's body was found dumped in Raymond, Wisconsin, the cause of death was determined to be sepsis resulting from pneumonia. An autopsy also revealed decaying teeth, broken ribs, evidence of sexual assault, and a cauliflower ear deformity. No one could identify her, so she became known by the place where she was found. She was the Racine County Jane Doe. 20 years after Johnson's death, Wisconsin police received a tip from a concerned citizen about a nurse who'd confessed to killing someone who worked for her in the late 1990s. In early November 2019, Racine County authorities announced both Johnson's identity and LaRoche's arrest. The revelation was bittersweet for Turkanian. She was glad that the girl she once thought might be her daughter had been identified, but Andrea was still out there. When would Turkanian get answers? 2 weeks later, on a cold Friday morning, Turkanian's phone rang. Melissa's name flashed across the screen. Turkanian answered, and without even saying hello, Melissa announced they got him. Earlier that morning, Melissa had received a call from a friend who happened to live on the same block as the Bowmans. The place was soaring with police. Patrol cars clogged the street, and flashing lights reflected off the windows of surrounding homes. Something was going on, something big. Turkanian felt dizzy. There was only one thing she could think to do. She hung up and called Koppelman. He was just sitting down at his desk for the day. Koppelman still did forensic sketching and online sleuthing on the side, but he'd returned to full-time work as an accountant after his mother passed away. Koppelman listened as Turkanian described what was happening at the Bowmans. They were sure it was connected to Andrea's disappearance. What else could it be? By that afternoon, the news was out. Bowman had been arrested by the Allegan County Sheriff's Office, but not because of anything to do with Andrea. He'd been arrested in relation to a murder Turkanian and Koppelman had never heard of, one committed 9 years before Andrea's disappearance, more than 800 miles away from the shores of Lake Michigan. Kathleen Doyle was the daughter of a naval officer and the wife of a pilot at the time of her murder in 1980. She had been married just 9 months. Her husband was deployed in the USS Eisenhower in the Indian Ocean, and Doyle, the couple's tabby cat, Ike, were living alone in a small house on Grand Beach Street in Norfolk, Virginia. Doyle was an aspiring author who had recently taken up journaling. The 25-year-old wrote about her anxieties and her excitements for the future. Doyle had been dead for almost 2 days when her body was found. She'd been stripped, gagged, and strangled with an electrical cord, and then arred and stabbed. Authorities suspected an intruder had done it, a stranger. They collected semen from the scene, but had few leads until serial killer Henry Lee Lucas was arrested in 1983. Lucas claimed that he and a partner, Otis Toole, were responsible for hundreds of unsolved murders across the country, including Doyle's. The following year, police charged the pair, but Lucas's confessions were later revealed to be false, and the charges were dropped. In a letter to the editor published by the Virginia Pilot in 2003, John O'Brien, Doyle's father, chastised detectives for their missteps and expressed the steadfast hope that his daughter's killer would be caught. That didn't happen before O'Brien died in 2016. Eventually, science caught up with the case. Genetic genealogy, which compares unidentified DNA with a huge number of samples stored in databases, was becoming a popular way of investigating cold cases. Authorities didn't expect the method to produce exact matches, but rather partial ones, genetic relatives police could use to triangulate and identify potential suspects. Norfolk investigators partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a leader in the field, to test DNA collected at the scene of Doyle's murder. Soon, based on genealogical research, they had a list of more than 30 suspects. Investigators needed to collect DNA from each person on the list to conduct a direct comparison, but with the suspects spread across several states and a backlog of other cases on their desks vying for attention, the process could take law enforcement months or even years. Then, in 2019, a group of Norfolk detectives went to a national seminar attended by cold case teams from around the country. It was an opportunity to learn about new technologies, collaborate on strategies, and exchange information. The Norfolk team, which had the list of suspects in the Doyle case in hand, got acquainted with a team from Michigan where, as it happened, one of the people on the list lived. The Michigan detectives were familiar with Dennis Bowman's name. He had a criminal record, and they knew what Kathy Turkanian had accused him of doing. The police also had his DNA on file, and they were willing to share it for comparisons. The results confirmed that semen found at the scene of Doyle's murder came from Bowman. Norfolk law enforcement issued a warrant for his arrest. 2 days later, on November 22, 2019, Melissa called Turkanian to report the police raid. Within a few months, Bowman would be extradited to Virginia to stand trial. By then, he'd already confessed. He'd admitted to entering Doyle's home through a back window. He claimed that he was drunk and that it was an attempted robbery. He said he didn't expect to find Doyle in the house, that he didn't plan to kill her, but she was there and he did. At the time, Bowman was in Norfolk for his annual 2-week service at the Navy Reserve. He was also out of jail on bond. He was awaiting trial for the attempted assault of the 19-year-old Holland woman, the one he fired a gun at before she escaped on her bike. Turkanian learned that she'd inadvertently played a role in solving Doyle's murder. Geoffrey Floor, the private detective, told her that at some point the Bowmans had visited the Allegan County Sheriff's Office to report Turkanian for harassment. They claimed she was making defamatory accusations about Dennis online. Investigators offered Dennis a bottle of water and kept it when he left. According to Floor, that was how his DNA came into their possession. As with the resolution of the Racine County Jane Doe investigation, Turkanian wasn't sure how to feel about the news in the Doyle case. Bowman was behind bars, but Turkanian felt like she was still waiting for her daughter's turn at justice. 3 months after Bowman's arrest, it came. In the first week of February 2020, with a thick layer of snow blanketing the ground, police returned to the Bowman's property. Melissa again called Turkanian, who phoned Koppelman. There was a forensic team on the site this time, with a crime scene tent and dogs in the backyard. Melissa sent photos. Officials appeared to be concentrating on one area in particular, and they had started to dig. Later that day, the police held a press conference. They announced that human skeletal remains had been found, and that they likely belonged to Andrea Bowman. The police needed to confirm her identity. Turkanian provided her DNA immediately. In March, almost 31 years to the day after Andrea disappeared, the results came back. There was a DNA match. Turkanian had been right, and not just about what happened to her daughter. The police had found Andrea's remains beneath the concrete slab behind the Bowman's house. Dennis claimed that Andrea's death was an accident. asked whether Andrea had ever accused Dennis of molesting her, Brenda said yes, but that she hadn't believed the allegations were true. "That's a lie," she told Andrea, "and you know it." It was Brenda who told police where to find Andrea's remains in a call from prison. Dennis had confessed to burying their daughter in the backyard. Brenda said she didn't believe him at first. They hadn't lived in their house in Hamilton where Andrea died, so how could he have buried her there? To Brenda's horror, Dennis explained that he'd moved their daughter's body to the new property as soon as they signed the papers for it. The cement slab in the yard was the headstone of the grave. Brenda never knew was there, in the shadow of the house she and Dennis shared for nearly 30 years. "He didn't lie this time," Brenda told the detective when Andrea's remains were found. "He didn't lie." As other witnesses took the stand, Dennis sat quietly in a green shirt, bow tie, and face mask. Testimony from experts involved with Andrea's recovery and autopsy revealed that she'd been dismembered. Dennis had wrapped her body parts in plastic bags and stuffed them into a cardboard barrel before burying them. The remains were too decomposed to establish an official cause of death, but the circumstances were sufficient for the medical examiner to rule what happened a homicide. Chris Haverding, the detective Turkanian and Koppelman met with at Goog's Pub and Grub, took the stand. Haverding said that after being arrested in Michigan in 2019 for Kathleen Doyle's murder, Dennis eventually told authorities that he had nothing left to lose, and went on to describe a version of events similar to the one he'd given Brenda, that Andrea's death had been an accident and that he tried to cover his tracks. He dismembered his daughter because she wouldn't fit in the cardboard barrel otherwise. To confirm the story, he pointed authorities to a machete stashed underneath his bed. The details were hard for Turkanian to hear, but she felt comforted knowing that Koppelman's other online detectives and people like Melissa were just a phone call or text away. They didn't believe Dennis's story. Like Turkanian, they were sure Dennis had intended to kill Andrea. He'd engaged in a clear pattern of violence against young women. In fact, just a month prior to the hearing, another crime had come to light. "Man sought in assault," reads a front-page headline in the Holland Sentinel, published October 18, 1979. The article details a violent attack on a 27-year-old woman who early on a Sunday morning was bound, gagged, and sexually assaulted by an intruder in her home. The perpetrator took cash before fleeing the scene and was described as a white man between 25 and 30 years old, with sandy hair and wire rim glasses. He was estimated at 5'7" and 150 pounds. According to the young woman, her assailant was wearing a leather jacket and dark pants. The newspaper published a police sketch of the suspect, his ink-blotted pupils staring blankly from the front page. More than 40 years after the assault, Dennis Bowman confessed to the crime. There was little risk in doing so. He was already behind bars for murder, and the statute of limitations in the case had long since expired. When they read the article about the 1979 crime, Turkanian and Koppelman couldn't help but notice the striking resemblance between Bowman and the police sketch. But it was the last line of the article that really caught their attention. According to the lead detective in the case, there had been a recent uptick in reports of prowlers in the neighborhood where the crime had occurred. Police suspected the attacker might have committed other crimes. Could there be other cold cases connected to Bowman? For years, Melissa had insisted hers was. She was frustrated that Bowman would confess to the 1979 assault, but not to what she believed he'd done to her. Now, at least, the police seemed to be listening to her. In February 2021, Michigan News 8 reported that police had confirmed Bowman was the prime suspect in Melissa's abduction. Rope recovered from the scene and kept on file since 1989, where the crime occurred, had come back negative for Bowman's DNA, but authorities said they were hopeful that technological advancements would allow it to be retested in the future. Shelley Speed Mills, a 19-year-old newlywed, was stabbed to death in her apartment in Grand Rapids, 30 miles northeast of Holland. Mills' mother, who had driven to the city to take her daughter to lunch, found her body. Around the time of Melissa's abduction, there were a series of similar incidents. A 13-year-old girl was nearly pulled off a Holland street by a stranger. A 9-year-old girl on a bike was stopped by a man who opened his car door and asked repeatedly if she wanted to get ice cream. And several weeks after Melissa was taken, 2 siblings, aged 9 and 7, were walking near Van Ralt's elementary school when they encountered a man they later estimated to be in his 30s. The suspect, who was driving a truck and wearing blue jeans and a blue winter jacket, offered the children money, then chased them on foot when they refused to get in his vehicle. The siblings later described the truck as shiny and red. Melissa had described her abductor's vehicle similarly: red truck, white cab. A photo of the truck Bowman once drove, provided to Turkanian and complimented by Bowman's sister-in-law, matches that description. Bowman's lawyer didn't reply to requests for comment. His client is expected to stand trial again in January 2022. Whether in person or online, Bowman and Turkanian will be watching the proceedings closely. Their friends speak often on the phone and social media. They're vocal evangelists of armchair detective work. The internet is an investigative tool, and used consistently in a certain way, it will get you somewhere, Turkanian said. After Becky Johnson was identified as the Racine County Jane Doe, police announced that she would be reburied next to her mother under her real name. Turkanian wants the same thing for her daughter. She's planning to go to court to obtain Andrea's remains so that she can bury her as Alexis Badger. It's a long shot, but then the chances that Dennis Bowman would ever be arrested were slim, and that happened. No one expected that Turkanian and Koppelman's persistence would help resolve numerous cold cases, but it did. Turkanian doesn't believe in closure. It's too pat a concept to apply to tragedy, too neat a way to describe what it means to find answers decades after a young woman vanishes or a body is found without a name. But nothing is impossible, and it's never too late. If Turkanian believes in anything, it's that. Well, that was a pretty tough one. I hope you guys, I can't say enjoyed that,